Hello everyone, this is The Africanist, a video podcast by Dr. Abdulmunim Ali. Today I am hosting Mr. Koert Lindijer, the Dutch NRC Africa Correspondent, journalist and author of 4 books. The books of the author include Nomadic Homestead in Nairobi. Is a book published in 1993. It tells a personal story of a white man and the Samburu ethnic community. It is this community that gave the author a friendly welcome to their bombers in Kenya, which made the author develop a strong emotional belonging to the group. The second book is Befrienders, is a book about nomadic ethnic groups and communities in Africa. The author traveled and spoke with pastoralists across the continent, including the Sahara Desert, Tuareg, Fulani, and Numeiry, nomadic ethnic group in South Sudan, and the Maasai and Samburu communities in Kenya. The book was published in 2004. The Curse of the Nile, a book written and published in 2013, it is the story of a former Sudan, the history which includes slave trades, racism, and discrimination against the South, the struggle movements of SPLM, and the separation of the country into two. Skyscraper on the Savannah, 40 Years of Correspondence, is the bestseller book written and published in 2023. It tells about the transformation that happened to the African countries where savannas used to be are becoming skyscrapers. These transformations are not only in the infrastructure but also in the culture and the political landscapes. I am very excited to interview Mr. Koert. Mr. Koert.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. The situation in Sudan has led to major humanitarian crisis, and it is the worst in the world, but yet it goes unnoticed by the international media. What are your thoughts on this? And how can journalists help raise awareness about Sudan?
It's horrible, isn't it, that we have to talk about the worst or the second worst of humanitarian disasters because we are comparing it to what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in the Ukraine. And of course, these kind of things, human suffering can't be compared one to another. I mean, all of them are horrible. I think the distinctive factor of the crisis in Sudan is not so much it has been a forgotten war, it is an ignored war. While the other two wars got all the publicity, all the diplomatic attention, the one in Sudan is difficult to access, so it's difficult to report on for us journalists. But what is much worse is that there is very little diplomatic pressure on the warring sides, which simply should either declare a ceasefire or humanitarian corridors. Both of them, the two parties, don't want to do it. There's not enough international pressure either from the Middle East or from Western countries. And that means that the humanitarian crisis has been continuously building up. And we went from 1 to 2 million displaced people. Now we are talking about 10, 12 million plus either refugees or displaced people. And the fact that we talk about a crisis not being attended is, in my 40 years of reporting, without precedent. It has never been
unprecedented.
Unprecedented. This has never happened before, that we just let millions of people on their own and a lot of people dying. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. And Sudan has always been in conflict and since the independence. And of course, you visited Sudan since the war in South Sudan. Now the country is separated. And then the war in Darfur, Blue Nile, different wars of Sudan. My question is, what are the main causes of this war in Sudan?
If I want to be nasty, I would say Sudan is a schizophrenic country. But of course, being a Sudanese, it's not being nice to be called schizophrenic, isn't it? But what I would mean by that is that the country has never managed to acknowledge, to recognize its own identity, whether it's African or Arabic influence. It has always been fighting with that identity. Politicians from the independence onwards, not recognizing that it is a multicultural, multi-ethnic country. I think that is one of the main reasons. If I would start an argument, what is wrong with Sudan, I would start there. I once interviewed a musician and he showed me all the different rhythms in music being produced in Sudan. And you can very clearly see from that it's neither African nor a Muslim Arabic country. It is all in one. And instead of being proud of it, instead of managing it, it has been led to schisms, it has led to wars, and it now leads to this horrible situation we are in now.
Yeah, and Sudan experienced major political changes. For example, in 1964, people rose against Ibrahim Aboud. In 1985, for example, against Numeiry, and 2019 also. The question is, these movements are obstructed by military coups. But as a journalist, and you visited Sudan during these revolutions, maybe, when did you view Sudan as uprising hope?
It's not part of my trade to use the word hope, although it is easy to say right now there is no hope for millions and millions of Sudanese. No, isn't it sad that Sudan is a country with a history of trade unions, very strong political parties from the very, very beginning, where other African countries have been struggling to build up the civilian infrastructure. Sudan had it, but never exploited it for positive developments. You mentioned the 3-4 points in history where civilians did take over and where eventually the military kind of neutralized the revolutions. The saddest is the 2019 civilian revolution, which was either hijacked by military or was not followed up by the civilians, because let's not forget, also the civilians have their problems among themselves, and that it had to be repeated again in 2019. And even now, where the civilian opposition is trying to find unity against this military intervention, either from the RSF or the SAF, doesn't really matter, but they're all guys with guns who think they know better than the civilians, and they will use their guns if you disagree with them. I mean, it is said that even now there is not a strong civilian opposition. It's one of the curses on the country that the civilians didn't get their act together. Why?
You mean the politicians, these people belonging to political parties, or what about the young people who are not affiliated to these political groups?
The young people who were in the 80s and before that, it were also young people who then kind of evolved in becoming professional politicians and played on the schisms, on the differences in the political social landscape. And that's what did lead to very disunited civilian opposition. So yes, the young civilians, without the responsibilities of running a political parties, did achieve a lot in 2019.
Exactly.
But they also failed.
Yes.
Let's not forget they failed.
They lack experience. They don't have the experience.
Somewhere the sentiment of rebellion against a regime has to be translated in a structured political movement, stroke party, one way or another. You can't just go emotionally on the streets and say, I'm against this and this. Somewhere you have to start building the country, and you need civilian structures, you need party structures for that. It's inevitable.
Also, this civilians' engagement should be inclusive. All Sudanese from all corners of Sudan should be involved, not only people from the major cities and Khartoum protesting against and they want to organize everything.
It should be urban, it should be rural, it should be all different ethnic, racial groups should be involved. And the beauty of 2019 was that that kind of autonomous movement was happening to that unity. In 2019, I saw all kinds of shades, colors, religions on the streets of Khartoum. So it was a unique moment, which was killed by the military in this
and warring parties, yeah.
The warring party.
One last question, and thank you so much for your valuable time, actually. You mentioned that Sudan's uprising should not be labeled as part of Arab Spring, what happened in Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria, but rather as a part of African movement or revolution. What's your final intake on that?
Well, of course, the Arab Spring was tried in 2011, right? It started in Tunisia. And it was tried in Sudan and it failed. So that, per definition, does it not make part of the Arab Spring? My issue is that Sudan is an African country with all these different shapes, shades, different opinions and religions. And that makes it by itself a different type of uprising than it was in other countries. In the Middle East countries, you could compare it in a way to Algeria, but I think it is unique because it was so diverse.
Yes.
And that was not the case in the other Middle Eastern countries, where it was just opposition against one dictator. Yeah. In Sudan, in my view, it was more than that.
Yes,
it was more than just against one dictator.
Yeah, really thank you so very much for this interview. We have come to an end to this interview, and you can find the content of this podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and the Africanist website. Thank you so much, Mr. Koert.
Shukran.